The World Health Organization defines adolescence as the second decade of life, a period encompassing everyone from middle schoolers to emerging adults in their early 20s. For much of the 20th century, psychologists like Jean Piaget viewed this stage as the absolute apex of human cognition, the point where formal operational thought finally matures. Yet modern data reveals a paradox. While latent cognitive capacity is high, that competence frequently fails to manifest in critical areas like advanced mathematics or real-world decision-making. This achievement gap creates a massive economic drain termed brainomics. If U.S. educational performance matched top-tier countries, the economic benefit would reach $100 trillion. This deficit represents a measurable loss of future productivity, innovation, and health outcomes. Solving the brainomics gap requires mapping our educational environments to the brain's asynchronous development, moving away from the view of the adolescent mind as a finished product. Ultimately, resolving this exact paradox is a $100 trillion economic imperative that depends entirely on correct neurobiological mapping. Adolescent neurodevelopment follows a complex and asynchronous timeline. By isolating specific functional networks, we can see exactly where the biological imbalance begins. The subcortical reward systems, the frontostriatal circuitry, mature rapidly and early. This region drives the brain's sensitivity to social cues and immediate rewards. Contrast this with the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for cognitive control and higher reasoning. It is among the last regions of the brain to reach maturity. This biological delay produces a dual behavioral output, a state of hyper-rationality where students take calculated risks, occurring alongside bouts of raw impulsivity. Because the prefrontal control system is still under construction, the brain is highly sensitive to environmental contexts. These surroundings dictate whether a young adult leans toward health-threatening or health-enhancing behaviors. The adolescent brain executes behavior exactly as its current architecture dictates. Stabilizing this output requires specific environmental interventions. During this period, the mental lexicon and semantic memory undergo a massive reorganization. Word knowledge becomes structured almost entirely around the meaning of concepts. Educators often assume that providing concrete, physical examples makes abstract concepts like algebra easier for the developing brain to grasp. Neurobiological evidence contradicts this assumption. These comparative models, based on the Kaminsky and Slutsky findings, show that concrete objects can actually hinder learning. Concrete examples communicate superfluous, irrelevant information. The brain mistakenly focuses on these physical details, which blocks the formation of a clear, abstract logical rule. Decontextualized symbolic mathematics allows the brain to build clean, transferable neural pathways without the interference of irrelevant data. Traditional rote testing environments fail to account for this shift in how the brain processes symbolic logic versus concrete data. Forcing concrete models onto adolescent brains misaligns with their developing capacity for abstract symbolic processing, creating an artificial barrier to learning. Despite a readiness for abstraction, modern education heavily over-indexes on verbatim processing, the rote memorization of discrete, isolated facts. Fuzzy trace theory offers an alternative, gist-based reasoning. This pathway relies on extracting the global, underlying meaning of information rather than just storing individual data points. The verbatim pathway relies purely on retrieval. This leaves the higher-order cognitive networks unstimulated during the most critical window of development. Gist-based reasoning requires top-down cognitive control. This active extraction of meaning engages and builds the developing prefrontal networks. Gist-based training generalizes to other forms of learning, improving a student's fluid intelligence across different subjects. This cognitive strategy reduces achievement gaps across varied populations, including youth with attention deficit disorders. Rote memorization wastes the biological window for upgrading fluid intelligence, whereas gist reasoning actively builds the hardware of the prefrontal cortex. There is a critical distinction between intelligence, raw cognitive capacity, and rationality, the ability to identify and pursue appropriate goals. High intelligence cannot always overcome non-cognitive variables like math anxiety or stereotype threat, which can severely disrupt academic performance. Emotional stress acts as a direct, physical tax on the brain's working memory. This interference consumes the limited space available for logic, forcing the processing of complex information to stall or fail. Because of this bottleneck, reasoning biases, like framing effects, can persist or even increase from childhood into adulthood, regardless of a student's IQ. High intelligence becomes functionally useless if emotional interference bottlenecks the working memory required to deploy it. The adolescent brain maintains a state of rapid neuroplasticity, forging new synaptic connections as a highly malleable network. Fluid intelligence is trainable when the environment demands advanced cognitive strategies rather than simple rote retrieval. Implementing decontextualized math, training gist extraction, and mitigating anxiety creates an environment that accelerates prefrontal cortex maturation. These interventions move the real-world performance of students toward their actual theoretical capacity, directly addressing the $100 trillion gap. The adolescent competence performance paradox is not an inevitability, but a structural failure that we now possess the neuroscientific blueprint to fix.